Hey, welcome to No Mama Grow Mama. This is the place where we talk about all things related to health and wellness for you and for your family. So, as you can imagine, that topic thread really can mean anything for our families, right? It can mean anything because at the end of the day, mental health is just as important as physical health. So, in today's episode of No Mama Grow Mama, I sat down and talked with Mike, who is a family mediator. This was a really interesting conversation for me because I wasn't quite sure where mediation fit in the sequence of like counseling for families, divorce, that kind of stuff. And it's a really personal topic for me too, because in my own life right now, I have 3 children of my own. I'm noticing that a lot of my friends and circle are starting to fall apart a little bit. So this was a really interesting conversation that I had with Mike. I hope you get some useful information out of it again. And the one thing that we wanted to make sure that we mentioned in the topic thread was if you are in a situation right now in your own life and you feel threatened, whether it be physically, verbally, that kind of stuff, and you're looking at counseling or mediation or those kind of things, Mike really wanted me to get across the point that you need to make sure that you seek out safety for yourself. Okay? Enjoy the show. I hope you take something away from it. Hey everyone, Jen Matthews here. Welcome to our No Mama Grow Mama episode today. Today we have a special treat. We are talking to Mike Ludi, who is a family mediation counselor, and he's also a social worker. This one is actually, this episode and a couple others that we're going to do in this series are kind of near and dear to my heart. I'm finding in this stage of my life, and I don't know if it's because of my age or because of the stage we're at as a family, that a lot of families in my circle are starting to struggle, fall apart. So this topic is really, really near and dear to my heart right now, and I'm excited to chat with Mike to learn sort of a little bit more about what he does. So Mike, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So Mike Ludi, that's the given part that you already said. And I am a social worker specializing in family mediation. And so mediation is a word that gets thrown around a lot lately in a lot of different fields, be it, really any field can have mediation in it. It really is a guided conversation. But in family, which is what I suppose the information that I would give today would be specifically for family, is that number one, it's an unregulated profession. And so anyone can call themselves a mediator. And that's important to know because there is some credibility needed in the background of talking about family law, just giving proper information about that, as well as preparing that plan or report or memorandum of understanding at the end. There's a structure to it. And so mediation, when we say that, I'll just start by saying I would be specifically talking about family mediation and connected to family law.
Okay. So then kind of going with that thread of topic then, let's delve into that a little bit. If I was looking for a family mediator, how would I decipher? Let's not mince words. How would I decipher the good from the bad? What would I look for?
I suppose that there's different ways. Part of it depends on what outcome you want to have. Okay. It can range from counseling and discernment. Is a couple really separating, or do they need to have couples counseling? And so in that, there's some people use the term transformative mediation to show to just explore feelings and decide, are we separating? Do we need just couples counseling or parent counseling? On the other end of it, it would be perhaps people who are already in court and maybe stuck in a lengthy process, and they decide, let's talk about it. We need a structure in place. It can be all points in between. And there are, as I said, it's unregulated. And so I would look for, there's a few loosely governing bodies, like the Ontario Association of Family Mediators, the Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Ontario, the Family Dispute Resolution Institute. It's actually quite a few I could name. And so the most common you see is an accredited family mediator. ACFEM are the initials behind. But in any case, even with the ACFEM, number one, you want to have a good fit relationally, maybe a particular gender or a particular background in parenting or small business or just whatever is unique to your needs. So there's a lot of different criteria, and I think it pays to do some homework and make sure that that person has the skills needed to meet your needs.
Okay. And would one mediator do all of those things that you had mentioned? So starting off with maybe just counseling to see if we can work through this. Would that same counselor then also work with you if it got to the process of going through the courts? Or would those be two totally separate people?
Generally, based on what I know, they're generally separate people. Counseling is a different hat than a mediator hat. I wear both, but I don't wear them at the same time usually. Partly because in the mediation role, you're a neutral third party guiding the conversation. So even lawyers who are mediators, I'm not a lawyer, but if I were, I couldn't represent both of you, because a lawyer's job is to be a voice for just one side and advocate and support that one side. A mediator's job is to guide the conversation in a way that both parties feel supported. And so having that neutrality, it's nice to separate it. It's nice to have counseling support or coaching, but the mediator, I guess the funny thing about it is it depends, but usually they're separate hats.
Okay. So I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here. And I think the best way to help families sort of realize where they're at, and sometimes maybe really at the beginning of where they're at, or just discovering, whoa, we're not where I thought we were.
Yeah.
Let's say my husband and I were struggling. Would we contact someone like you if we felt like we were just, okay, we can't talk about this because you and I are not on the same page, our communication styles are different, like we're just not talking, we're not moving forward, we're not healing things? Is that when we would contact you? Yeah,
that's one example of kind of feeling it out. And quite often there'll be a number of different people involved, but maybe the people will come first. Step one with me is voluntary. And so I guess if someone were coming individually to discern that, then it might be more of my counseling hat that I'd be wearing at that time. Whereas if both parties came to me, I wouldn't meet with them both together initially anyway. We usually meet them separately. The mediation path, and the reason I say separate hats, is that mediation in its own right as a path is voluntary all the way through. Both parties need to agree to try it first.
Okay.
So I usually encourage, because my hat is primarily one of mediation, I encourage people, if they're trying to figure out whether or not they need to separate, to specifically seek out the couples counseling and discern that first. And then if mediation is a path, sometimes it comes about in mediation that, hey, maybe you guys do want to reconcile. That's okay, but the mediation process is voluntary, and it does, from my process, we start with individual meetings just to make sure both sides are feeling equally supported and equally informed about the path they're about to take. Okay,
so then help me understand, from what I gather with your answer there, what is the difference between counseling and mediation then?
So maybe I'll back up and say what mediation is first, so we can see what happens around that. So in a fairly straightforward, and I should say there'll be many mediators around who will have a different style than what I'm describing, and that's part of the beauty of it is fit. You want to, like, if someone else were describing this, they might describe it differently. So what I'll say is what I do, and also what I generally see happen after the voluntary step of yes, we'd like to mediate. Then it begins with an intake session of an individual intake, just to be uninterrupted and to explore each side's goals separately, and also most importantly safety, domestic violence screening, and to identify those places, be it physical threat or emotional or verbal or financial, whatever barriers might be there preventing someone from feel like they have an equal voice. It's the mediator's job to screen for that and make sure that we can balance that power appropriately. It also is a good time to make sure we work, mediation is called alternative dispute resolution. It is an alternative to, say, a traditional court path or traditional legal routes, but we're not in opposition to the law profession. We encourage independent legal advice. And so sometimes that's a time to pause and let someone explore what their lawyer told them, or maybe they haven't had advice yet, and we can identify, I call them good lawyer questions, because we want to make sure they have a voice for just them as well. So after that initial time, then the people come together for joint sessions, and we talk through Specifically in family law, we talk about the custody access arrangements for the children, the parenting plan, as well as support issues and property, and which means anything financial. And I can elaborate on those topics separately. But as we go through joint sessions, then I always describe mediation as Vegas of the legal system. What happens in mediation stays there. And I can't be subpoenaed. I can't call into court to say anything other than maybe logistical. I only share what the parties agreed to share. And I write that in a report. And the idea is you're paying one mediator to guide the conversation in a little more of an emotionally informed context than you would if you had two lawyers, paying for two lawyers to have the same conversation. There's a little bit more of that transformative healing power in the conversations, but there's also that empowering to give clients really information to make their own choices. That gets balanced with usually independent legal advice so that there's no buyer's regret. I write a report saying what they agree to, and then you get independent legal advice to be sure it's the right path. And so that is a very defined structure. To answer your question in a more holistic way around that, sometimes we encounter issues where, counseling would be a good idea. And so in that case, if I were to counsel one side and not the other, then that could jeopardize my neutrality in that situation. So I will sometimes meet individually with clients separately, just as a little caucus breakout session, but I offer the other side the same. And just to be mindful of people's costs. Usually in separation, money is a very sensitive topic. So if I were to put on my counseling hat in addition to the mediation process, I don't think it would honor that system, that process to get through the family law conversation. And so, whereas if someone were in mediation with a different mediator, I might have my counseling coaching hat on to help them go through that process separately, because then I can be more of a counseling ear for just them. Because neutrality is a key part of that. So we want to make sure both parties feel supported.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, when someone seeks out a mediator, typically it is because they're ready to start the process of separation, which would likely lead to divorce. Counseling can be mixed in there, but it tends to be the preface to that to see if they can work out the issues and stuff without needing to get to a mediator. Is that
right? And most of the people who come to me are fairly certain they want to separate, or they're in the process, or sometimes they've already been separated and they want to change a court order or something and revisit things or update a parenting plan. And so, if they come and they're not sure, then I encourage they get counseling first, or if they've come to me as a counselor, then I kind of coach them through what would that be. It really is two different streams of conversations that I like to keep separate. I wouldn't do counseling for a mediation client or vice versa, because I think it would jeopardize the neutrality.
Okay.
But I just wear both hats.
That's interesting. Okay. So then you had said you could touch a little bit more on the financial and all of that kind of stuff. Can you touch on that for us?
Yeah. So in a separation, so I won't get into all the details of family law, and I would say if anyone is wondering more about this, I always encourage courts have free advice lawyers. There's a lot of great lawyers, I'm sure, in every city that might be watching this. And so it's okay, get some free legal advice or get some just unbundled consult if you have specific family law questions. So the information I provide is just very general in that way. But families going through separation will have four main categories to talk about. So you have custody or decision making about the children, which could be, and that's the main big life decisions like education, religion, and non-emergency medical decisions. And so that usually you hear, sole custody or joint custody, but there's actually quite a range and some nuances in that can answer the practical questions of who's making those appointments day to day, how good is communication to make those decisions together versus one person. But also if one person's deciding, how do you honor the feelings and identity of the other parent, even if they're sole custody? So we explore those issues. Access is the second category, and that just means time. Because you're both going to spend time with your children, presumably, barring safety. And even with safety, there are structures in place to make sure relationship building can happen in an accountable way. And so we talk about time, and some people like wide open, flexible time, and others like a very structured year down to the minute, and it's whatever works for people.
Yeah.
Then support is a very, in child support, is fairly scripted according to family law and the child support guidelines. People do negotiate around that, but we always encourage independent legal advice for that as well. Spousal support is a very gray area that I always say, get legal advice before you even bother talking about it, because I don't want people to speculate on whether or not it should even be paid if they haven't had legal advice and it might not be something applicable to their situation. And then the last category, property, means anything financial. And so that can be, a big one is the matrimonial home, but it could also be student debts, it could be shared car loans, it could be really anything from your date of marriage to date of separation that had financial worth. And so that's where, depending on needs, sometimes people have more of a focus on, say, young kids who need a really detailed parenting plan versus, say, two people who were self-employed with a small business who need more of an accounting kind of focus. And it's difficult for any mediator to be all of those things. And so I do all those categories. Some mediators won't do property or specialize in that. But it's important to reach out to those allies, like an accountant, like lawyers, or like sometimes Family and Children's Service is involved, and they'll have recommended plans for parenting. Really, it's a matter of identifying who are the supports, who are the allies in this process that people can rely on, so that outside of the mediation, there's still mom and dad, and we want to make sure they can be the best mom and dad they can be.
Right. So many questions are popping into my head as you're talking, and so many scenarios and friends and situations. It would be something where off camera and off recording for the No Mama Grow Mama show, I would just like to sit down with you and have a coffee, because it's very, well, to me, I'm a healer in this world, and I want everybody to be happy and sunshine and roses, and, I want to help everybody and that kind of stuff. I think it's a necessary topic to talk about as well. It's a sad topic for me to talk about, but I think it's an important one for people to really learn about and hear about, because let's face it, the reality is some of our viewers will probably need your services. So I think it's a great topic to talk about. Okay, Mike, so tell me then, if I thought, again, we'll play devil's advocate, I'll use my own family as a reference. If my husband and I thought that we needed to use your services, we've done counseling, we're at our end, we need to call it quits, it's just not going to work. We call you, we make an appointment, is that right?
Yep.
What would we expect on the first, interaction? Tell us what happens after we call and make that appointment.
So once I would confirm from both sides that both were willing to do that, I would set up separate appointments for you to meet you individually. Okay. Usually an hour to an hour and a half conversation of just hearing each side to make sure it's the right path for you, and just to be uninterrupted, to explore the goals of partly what led to the separation, but also it's a fairly future focused endeavor of one, it's educating what does the law look for in this. And I like to think of the law as it's like a cast. So if you break your arm and you have two bones in your arm and they need to be held in place while they heal, a separation in a relationship is brokenness. And how do we heal and start new identities in a healthy way? Well, first we kind of identify the break. And so quite often communication is the first thing. And we see, what are the touchy subjects? There might be spots that people agree on, and there might be some hot buttons. And we just identify those and see, what do you need from me or from other people as support in that. And then through the process, think of that broken arm like the agreement is like a cast to hold things in place while they heal. The law, some people use it as a threat, like, oh, I'm going to take you to court, or I'll get my lawyer. And I like to rephrase it and say it's a structure. Just like a cast is a supportive place to let the bones heal while your arm heals. A good mediation agreement or court order or separation agreement that is a place to hold the relationship until your identity heals enough that you can progress into a co-parenting relationship. And that journey is a bumpy ride. It won't feel nice sometimes, but the idea is in your choice, and mediation isn't always the best choice. I want to emphasize that too. Yes, maybe you want to try it, but there might be reasons in place where it isn't appropriate. If there was a power imbalance, or a big one is if someone didn't want to share their finances, you need full financial disclosure. If someone's not comfortable doing that for whatever reason, then maybe mediation isn't the right context to have that conversation. And that's where court can happen. There is court-connected mediation as well, but or sometimes collaborative family law, where two lawyers will kind of guide the conversation, or traditional court. But none of those need to be a battleground. They can be a structure. And you're going to have the same conversations in each place. In one mediation, you're empowered to have the conversations yourself. And in the lawyer one, in the collaborative family law, for example, the lawyers guide the conversation more directly. And for lawyers who are specialized in that, or the more traditional court where you let a judge decide. In each step, I think stereotypically, you're giving up your own voice to another authority. And with that, of course, costs generally rise as well. And so my encouragement is to think of it, where do you feel most supported to have that conversation? And so that's part of the intake, is making sure that it is a safe place to have a difficult conversation. And I wouldn't be helping people if I tried to be the be-all and end-all of that. We identify what do people need. Am I the right person? Maybe I'm not. And maybe I would help more by finding the right person. And so the intake is a really key time for that. And so both parties get that. And once I can be sure that that's the case, then we move into conversations together, informed by I can tell you what the law tends to say. I can't tell you what to do with it. I can see what I normally see judges in the court say, or what I tend to see lawyers say, but it's not my place to tell you specifically legal advice, because I'm not a lawyer, and it's important that I might know the answer and one side might not want to hear it. It's not my place to tell them. And so I call those good lawyer questions. Here's what you should ask your lawyer. And the idea is you're in partnership then, and using your time with the lawyer very efficiently so that you're not racking up hundreds of dollars and needlessly.
So a best case scenario would be to use a mediator first if the situation, both sides were going to be agreeable to making sure that all of those, is it 5 things that you said?
How you slice them, but four general categories I use, just because it's easy to point to my fingers, but
we end at 5.
my thumb's for those extras.
So you would work with a mediator as long as both sides were agreeable to work out those 4 or 5 things. Then you would take that mediation agreement to a lawyer to make it official. That's
right. And so that part, the separation agreement is the name of the contract in family law for that. Now, just about every professional I know in this will caution against the online stuff you can get, because it's just not as maybe as informed or as detailed as you would want it to be if you need it to be enforceable. The mediation report itself will summarize, and those four categories, there's a lot of details within those categories that are important to consider, but it kind of frames the conversation as we go. The report will be as thorough as people want it to be. Sometimes it's helpful to be more thorough than people thought. They might say, yeah, we have this plan, and our job is to turn over every stone to make sure those what ifs are taken care of too, that maybe people hadn't thought of. And if people want to have an enforceable document at the end, ideally the mediation report will capture all the things that the lawyers might be asking about. What's your plan for if one of you moves? What's your plan for when the kids start school, or any scenario? We try to anticipate them. And a good plan is going to manage expectations for the future as far as parents can see into the future. So sometimes, especially with younger kids, that's only a little ways away. Sometimes we can plan through school. Sometimes people are not too worried about it and they can plan whatever. There's a lot of flexibility in needs, but as I say, the good report is going to manage all those expectations. And then you want to know, who's the audience for that? Is it a lawyer? Is it a judge? or you're just happy to honor it because it's honor. Even if it's a court order, if someone doesn't want to follow it, they're not going to follow it, but there's greater enforceability to it. The mediation report itself isn't legally binding, and so it is nice to get that next step to convert it into a separation agreement.
Right. So mindset of an individual or a family, so two individuals who would be coming to use mediation services. You had kind of touched on it before where, if there's an imbalance of power within the relationship, it really has to be, talk to me about what the mindset would look like of the individuals who would come to mediation. What would they be thinking? What would their goals be? What does that look like?
That's a good question. That's a huge, it depends. But I suppose for the most part, something has been happening before they come to me. And so there were things that they had to figure out on their own. And sometimes people need to be reminded that they actually have some resilience in the brokenness too. Something has worked so far, or maybe it's been completely chaotic and they've been referred by a judge instead. And so, but in all of it, as long as taking away the first layer of safety, of course, is what can we consistently plan for the kids? What's going to be best for the kids? And so I think just about every family law professional you encounter, the underlying thought is, what are the children's best interests? How can we help? I always say, well, how do we help mom and dad be the best mom and dad they can be? Because that's what's for the kids. And so quite often people will already have an access schedule kind of sorted out, or I suppose not quite often, because other times people come and they say, I don't know what to do. My lawyer told me this and his lawyer told me this, and we're afraid to share the kids. What do we do? And those are quite tense times. And those are the times when maybe the separation is fresh and there's a lot of confusion and a lack of power and control. And sometimes legal advice is more adversarial than you wish it was. And so things get volatile, and stress levels get up, decision-making goes way down. And statistically, that is a much less safe time. And so in that screening, that power, I always like to say, make sure if safety is a concern for you, make sure you have a safety plan, and have a contact, have your identity documents, have those safety plans in place, which I've done a horrible job describing exactly what a safety plan is right now, but look into what that is so that you know. And then step two, if assuming safety is all good and you want to talk next, then I focus on, from the kid's point of view, what's going to help. Yeah, we can satisfy what the law says, but remember, the law is the lowest acceptable standard of behavior. We don't flip it on its head and say, what would make it awesome? There is a chance, after the emotions are healing, there's a chance to have an awesome life for both of you. And we forget that because it hurts. The separation is painful. And so I try to flip it on its head and say, what would help your kids tell great stories about this time? So even though I don't tend to meet with children, I always remind parents that they are planting seeds for the kids. There's the stories the kids will tell. If you have a 5-year-old, then 10, 20 years from now, that child is going to say, they could say, yeah, my parents battled in court and spent $60,000 each on a court battle, and that's why I spent this much time with each parent, and that's why I can't go to Harvard now. And then other kids could say, no, you know what? My parents didn't get along, but they sat down and they talked about it, and it only cost them a little bit of money, especially if it's subsidized. It probably costs them $5 or $10, and they sorted it out, and they got practice on how to talk about things. And then they became a great co-parenting team in the business of parenting. And so really, society-wise, we talk about, I'll sue you or I'll threaten you with court. But if we talk about it in a sense of, I'll sit down with you and I'll talk about this, not very emotionally satisfying in the short term when we're angry, but in the long term, it has amazing results. And so the idea is how do we get someone from that pain and anger and perhaps less ideal versions of themselves sometimes when the hurt kind of interferes with decision making. How do we switch that into being a positive and a story that models for kids how to resolve conflict?
It's so funny because as I listen to you talk, I really think my husband and I have been married for I don't know, I'm sorry, I think 12 or 13 years now, maybe something like that, maybe even longer, I don't know. And I think probably every married couple goes through spits and spurts. We've been together for over 20 years, where they think about, you know, what does it mean to get separated? What does it mean to get divorced? And listening to you talk at the very beginning, I just thought, you know, if I was ever in that situation, I'm a pretty well-informed person and I have a lot of connections and a lot of friends, but I still think that if I was in that situation where my husband and I decided to separate, I think my head would spin.
Yeah.
So, like, I can't even fathom you talking about making it for the best for the children and stuff. I think in an ideal world, that sounds exactly like something we would want to do for all of our children, but how do you even get there? Like all the issues you talked about, like what do we do with the house? Who lives where? Who gets the children on the weekends? Who gets the children for Christmas? Like there's so many issues with that. It makes my head spin.
Yeah, and that's when we're calm and not emotionally impacted by it personally. It is a mind blow, and I tell people, give yourself permission to find this really stressful. You know, you're learning, you're trying to make this new identity for yourselves, and trying to learn this weird language of family law that no one ever uses except in one room in the courthouse. It's like it's so much, but at the same time, it's a hurry up and wait. So we get some quick fixes in place to say, okay, for this amount of time, we can at least count on you having the kids then, me having them then, and let's agree to talk again in 2 months or in 1 year, or, you know, every situation is unique. It's whatever time will be enough to build trust for the next level, because along with the communication, trust is usually a big, if not tied for first, it's a close second. And so how do we reestablish trust? And I like to use the analogy of train tracks. So whether you're married or not, if to be honoring of your own identities as parents, think of you're each a rail of the train. So you're going along parallel, and train tracks aren't very effective if they're going like this or like this. They need to be in line. And when you're separated, they're not going to touch again, but they need to keep on the same path. You have your individual new identity. I have mine, but we have to stay like this because we are co-parents. And the kid is the train. And if those tracks aren't running smoothly together and knowing where the other one's going to go, then that's when the kid has a bumpy ride. And so a lot of the studies are not so much focused on separation, it's the conflict. So people can separate quite, maybe not always amicably, that's kind of a gentle term, but at least they can separate in a way that emotions settle, trust builds enough to at least be able to, sometimes we start with coexistence and move to more positive, but you can become effective co-parents if you just think, what are we offering the child together in that smooth ride along the tracks? And it takes practice, it takes trust building, and generally it takes as long to get out of a conflict as it took to get into it. So you give yourself permission to slow it down, and even though this is an identity change for you, it's about your kids. Yeah. So it takes a lot of strength too to heal. Sometimes we're too broken and hurt to have that strength, and so it's not a judgment call to say, "Oh, I'm not strong enough to mediate." I don't mean that, because we want to honor those hurt feelings too, but provide a safe place to. Sometimes it's just a matter of sharing. Oh, I was thinking this because of what you did, and sometimes people will just get to a place where they, wow, I didn't realize that's why you did it, and maybe it leads to an apology or just a different awareness level, and it's just a matter of taking the time to do that, and that's what a court setting does not offer. Is just that understanding building over time.
That's a great analogy with the train. As I hear you describe it, and I can envision people in my own life who are doing it, who well together as a parent, I think, navigating the post-marriage period. And those who are struggling with it, I can definitely see how they do move together in sync. Even if they don't agree, they agree to continue to move together.
Right.
You topple the cart, which is your children. And that's a pretty serious image to see that. So that was an excellent analogy. I love that.
Thanks.
So let's say someone, so Mike is from the Hamilton, Ontario, Canada area.
Waterloo, actually.
Waterloo, is that where your practice is?
Yeah, Kitchener-Waterloo.
Okay, sorry. So let's say someone is not from the area. How would they find, if they decided that they needed a mediator, how would they find a mediator? Is it something that is a referral basis, or do you just go on the Google machine and find?
Google machine is one way. Again, it's an unregulated profession, and so the acronym OAFM, Ontario Association of Family Mediators, has a website where you can find a mediator. Those would be accredited family mediators. There's ADRIO is another, the Alternative Dispute Resolution Institute of Ontario has a few, and I think they're called either certified or chartered mediators. And then there's FADRIO, which is Family Alternative Dispute Resolution, I believe. They're a newer body. And my apologies to all the other organizing bodies out there that are numerous to list and I'm less familiar with. But I would definitely base it on one of the organizing bodies. Mediation is a very new profession, much like the larger field of peace and conflict studies. It's, even though it's been around 30, 40 years, depending on where you study the roots of it, and culturally generations and past, but in the kind of norm of culture, it's a new thing. And so I think everyone is trying to figure out how to incorporate it into the norm. And so I would recommend looking at those organizing bodies just to get someone who at least is familiar with family law. Or if you have a lawyer, your lawyer probably has a connection to that. Every family court has a contract for mediation, and the beauty there is it's subsidized. And so that is a great way to, you just don't need to spend thousands of dollars or even hundreds of dollars sometimes, depending on your income level, because the subsidies exist to help people on a sliding scale. And so spend the money on your kids, let them have an awesome life, let them eat, let them have books for school or whatever. And there's ways to do this without spending thousands of dollars.
Right. So punching into, for viewers outside of Ontario and outside of Canada, if they were to punch in like an association of family mediators, that should be a great start to find them, that body of practitioners. And
my suspicion is, internationally or interprovincially, I think if I were looking, I would start with a family court and learn who are the associations that have credibility for that region. Okay. Because credibility is a key part of it. Anyone can call themselves a mediator, and I can't pass judgment on how effective they are, but I would want someone who is credible, because you don't want to waste your money.
Yeah, that's really no different than our industry too. We have a lot of that in our industry, but I think it's the unregulated thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, let's do a little side switch. What happens in a best case scenario, mediation scenario with a family? And what does the worst case scenario look like with a family from start to finish? So I've come and said, we want to mediate, and we're going to work through the court. So from the time we start to mediate till the paperwork is all done, what does the best case scenario of that look like?
I've met some people will come and maybe, just to distinguish the terminology, a separation agreement is that contract of the plan. What are we going to do about the kids? What are we doing about the dog and the property? And dogs are considered property in law, incidentally. But though I have done access visits for pets, the separation agreement is the plan, whereas a divorce is just a legal document that says you're no longer married to this person, you can remarry. So they are separate, although the words are sometimes used interchangeably. And I have met people who have adult children, and they separated when the kid was an infant, or maybe they were never even together, and they come to me looking for help filling out divorce papers or something. And it's like, but they've been working it out on their own for 20 years. And good job. You don't need me. You don't need me at all. You can go to your local courthouse and get your divorce papers and fill out the forms. But so or you get a lawyer to help you with that. But so I suppose that ideal is best case scenario. They don't need me at all. They figured it out because they were able to set aside their differences and come up with a loving plan for their child. Other times people just need a little bit of coaching on what is being asked of them and some understanding building of each other. And so just a couple of conversations and they'll realize, oh, I was making an assumption about this, or you know what, I've made a mistake and I'm sorry. And they'll hug and they'll come away feeling better. Those are really nice times. They're not too common, but it's nice to have them. And then on the other extreme, it's sad when it comes to times where we terminate. Mediation being voluntary means I'm also volunteering to be part of it. And so there are times when I realize I'm no longer effective. One of those is right up front. If there's not financial disclosure, then someone's not playing nice. If you're not going to be willing to be transparent, as you were up to the time of separation, you were together. And so the requirement is that you will disclose your finances. And if someone doesn't want to play nice or hide their money or something like that, then that's a waste of the other person's time and mine for that matter. So I just cut it off with that. And the sad thing about that is that's when the children suffer, because you're dragging it out and they're not coming up with a plan. So sometimes we do partial plans and maybe they have a reason they don't want to share, that they're just not comfortable sharing. That's fine. But maybe we can come up with a partial plan to just say, when do your kids get to see you? And because from their point of view, for the most part, they miss mom and dad and they want to see them. So that, I suppose, in my own dad buttons, when I'm thinking about the kids, I always try to imagine the child there, and I think about it from them, because for the most part, the child's going to say, mom and dad are rock stars, right? Because they're mom and dad. And wouldn't it be awesome if we had a plan to keep it that way? Because there will be times when they don't feel that way just because they're teenagers or something. But let's let them have normal developmental ages and stages and try to mitigate those other more manageable sides of things by working through the conflict. And we can't turn off conflict. So let's just work at it in a healthy way and figure out some skills to do that.
Right. This conversation has been awesome. I'm sure I'm going to go away from here and I'm going to say, oh, why didn't I ask him this question and this question and this question? But I think that we have covered a lot. I mean, it's not, from what I take from it, it's not a great stage to necessarily want to be at in life, but it's certainly going to be necessary for many, many families.
Right.
So I think having this information out there is definitely a benefit. And at the very least, if you never have to go through mediation, you will certainly know people that will have to go through mediation, and probably having this information will help you be a better sibling, a better friend, all of those kind of things, to support those people in your life. So Mike, 3 things you would leave if our families, the families watching this, didn't remember anything else you said or are just tuning in now. What are the 3 things you would like to leave them on the topic of family mediation? What would you like to say about that?
I think the things I normally kind of come back to, and maybe it's a broken record because I said them earlier, is number 1, the choices you make to sort out this plan are planting seeds for the stories your kids will tell. And so what story do you want your child to tell? And pause, because sometimes that's an angry response, and I want them to stick it to that other person. But ultimately, what story do you want your kids to tell about this time? And if they could report that my mom and dad are awesome and they really did that for me, what is that you want them to report on? Is it I stuck out and stuck it to that person? Or do you want them to say, yeah, we figured it out enough that even though they never really wanted to talk anymore, they did it for me? And from a kid's point of view, what a great thing to be able to say is to never doubt that mom and dad did what they could in whatever way. And I wouldn't want to plant the seed that would be there are some situations where accountability is the most loving thing required. And so there are some times when we need to have structure in place for one individual or another, but still we can model for the kids a story that is a healthy one to tell. And so that would be my main one. The second is the train tracks. Co-parenting is like train tracks, and the kid is the train. So if you're not in line, then the kid's going to have a bumpy ride. And those are two. And and the third one, I would speculate and rant on and on, but I always dump so much information on people. Then maybe that would be the third one, is that this process happens at a time when you're emotionally compromised, and it is a lot of information. And so give yourself permission to take it slow. Ask questions more than once, because sometimes we don't remember stuff right away. So it's stressful. Give yourself permission to be stressed and ask for help in whatever way you need. And there are people to connect you to those resources.
That's excellent. Okay, so we're going to put Mike's information in the show notes beneath the show that you're watching. And we're also going to get those links from Mike with the associations that he has referenced, just as a starting point for people. Especially if you're not in the Waterloo area. So that's a great place to start if you are looking at the process, have questions, whatever the case may be. We'll put that in the show notes so you have access to that. Mike, thank you very much for chatting with us and for helping to educate me, especially because this is not something I am familiar with at all, and sharing this information to help families.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mike.
All right. Take care.